The real TurboGrafx begins here. Welcome to the post-launch glory days on TurboWorks Episode 5.
This is your big, beautiful love machine.
The TurboGrafx 16's US launch lineup was kind of a mess, huh? For every great game, there was also a, not great game. But NEC didn't wait long to get down to the business of proving the system's mettle. The console's October, November, and December 1989 releases settle in and almost entirely range from very good to great. This is how you maintain a console's momentum. This episode brings us two arcade conversions, games that will be very familiar to viewers of this channel, but where their previous console adaptations have been anywhere from middle to good, the TurboGrafx 16 renditions set the bar for quality. These two games may not be flawless arcade conversions, but they come so close that it's hard to criticize them, especially in the context of 1989 and the way these same properties played out on NES and Master System. First up, we have Sega's Fantasy Zone. It's a phenomenal port of the arcade game, but it does raise the question of what the hell a key Sega property is doing here on the competition's console. I don't really know what to tell you aside from the fact that Sega didn't see home consoles as their primary market until many years after this. Here in 1989, the company still regarded arcades as the centerpiece of their business. And while they wanted to sell lots of their own consoles, they had no compunctions about licensing their coin-op properties out to competing systems. I guess the logic was that income from license fees was every bit as fungible as income from direct sales. Maybe even more fungible, since Sega had to fund development, manufacturing, and distribution of a game for Master System or Genesis, whereas the costs of creation for this version rested entirely upon the backs of developer Bits Laboratory and publisher NEC. And bear in mind that Sega had always licensed its games out from the beginning. Turbo and Zaxxon were major releases for ColecoVision. Games like Carnival showed up on Atari 2600, and we've even seen licensed official adaptations of Sega games to NES and Famicom, including two versions of Fantasy Zone. Did Sega care that Fantasy Zone for TurboGrafx 16 grabbed the Master System version of the game by the scruff of its neck and forced it to drink toilet water? Probably not. They were making money off of this version without lifting a finger. And ultimately, playing this version of Fantasy Zone only helped raise the profile of the series and boosted the value of Sega's arcade properties. There are no downsides to this release for Sega besides the fact that it made a 3-year-old release for Master System obsolete, which is to say, maybe it shortened that version's long-tail earning potential a tiny bit. But Sega had already moved along to next-generation hardware and was just a few months from winding down its American Master System business. So really, just not a big deal at all. You know who did benefit from Fantasy Zone showing up on TurboGrafx 16, though? You, me, us. People who like good video games. This is something like the third or fourth time Fantasy Zone has appeared on this channel, so I don't need to go into extensive detail about the basics. This is a Defender-style shooting game in which you control a little guy who is also a spaceship by the name of Opa Opa. You can scroll freely and under your own control in either direction. Each stage loops infinitely, and you only clear a level by destroying the base-type enemies that hover motionlessly at fixed points in the torus, spawning new monsters while waves of other foes appear from off-screen. Once you defeat all of the base foes in the level, a boss appears. Defeat that boss, and you move along to the next level. Simple, right? Did I mention that most large enemies or waves of enemies drop coins upon defeat? And the coins you collect can be spent in shops that appear periodically in each level in order to acquire power-ups and extra lives? It's a pretty fantastic game, and the Master System version was a real standout at the time of that console's launch in the US. Fittingly, Fantasy Zone is equally notable here in the early days of the TurboGrafx 16, too. The Master System release, great as it was for the time, suffered a lot of technical compromises and scaling down from the System 16 arcade board to a console with capabilities more on par with the System 16's predecessor, System 1. It played so well on Master System that I can't imagine many people complained at the time, but when you see the Master System release side by side with the TurboGrafx 16 port, there is just no comparison. Again, this turbo chip may not contain 100% arcade-accurate code, but it is a near thing, this Fantasy Zone doesn't compromise anything to speak of. It genuinely feels like the arcade experience on a home console. In arcades, Fantasy Zone included a number of features that Sega culled when bringing the shooter to Master System. For example, the coin-op forced you to gun down 8 base-class enemies per level. On Master System, there were only 6. The arcade game allowed you to track the relative positions of base foes with a simple radar readout indicator at the bottom of the screen, which Master System dropped. When defeated on Master System, base enemies simply vanished rather than leaving behind wreckage, and when you faced bosses, the stage backgrounds would dissolve into black. The TurboGrafx 16 restores the original arcade version's fine details. You fight 8 bases per level, track their locations with a radar readout, and witness their corpses scrolling back when bosses materialize into the confines of a stage. It's a nice visual touch, and it also results in some challenging play at times, since you need to maneuver around level structures while fighting those bosses. Of course, the TurboGrafx 16 offered a controller with built-in rapid-fire right out of the box, which does a lot to level the field. No need for a rapid-fire unit here. Fantasy Zone is never not challenging, but it does feel more manageable on TurboGrafx, thanks to the ability to flip a toggle on the gamepad and automate Opa Opa's destructive onslaught. It's worth mentioning that the Turbo version of Fantasy Zone features the same bosses that players encountered in the arcade, whereas the Master System version included a lot of newly invented bosses. I assume that the final boss, who is, spoilers, Opa Opa's father, remains the same as well, but I can't say for sure because I can never seem to beat the next to last boss, IDA 2, in any version of this damn game. That's a me problem though, not something that you need to worry about. Despite a couple of intensely frustrating bosses, this version of Fantasy Zone absolutely shines. It eclipses the Master System version, and the less said about how the NES versions stack up, both Tengens and Sunsofts, the better. More than any of the launch day titles, Fantasy Zone shows just what the TurboGrafx 16 is capable of, which, considering that the game hails from NEC's direct competitor Sega, is a really weird turn of events. Video games, man.
Neatly complementing Fantasy Zone, we also have the TurboGrafx 16 port of R-Type. Not only does this adaptation shame the competition's take on the game, it also crushes the Japanese version of the game.
See, in Japan, R-Type shipped early in the console's life. The level of graphical detail that developer IREM stuffed into this port of their white-hot arcade shooter proved too memory-intensive for the compact HuCard format. The game simply couldn't fit on a slim wafer card. Rather than compromising the quality of the game, IREM took the rather unorthodox approach of dividing the game into 2 parts and releasing it as separate HuCards. R-Type in March 1988, and a chip called R-Type 2, which was not in fact the actual arcade R-Type 2, in June.
I find this concept hilarious. Can you imagine booting up a brand new game and jumping immediately to a face full of level 5 of R-Type? Insane.
But thankfully, the slow localization of the PC engine into the US meant that by the time the console shipped here, NEC had managed to expand the innate capacity of the turbo chip format to be able to encompass both halves of the game at once. This R-Type card contains the material that Hudson spread across 2 separate releases in Japan. In fact, I was once scolded about this. When Konami published the Virtual Console version of R-Type in the early days of Nintendo Wii, I gave it an unenthusiastic review for 1UP, whereupon a PR representative sent me a grumpy email reminding me that the US version of R-Type for TurboGrafx 16 made for a much better deal than the Japanese release. Well, consider this video my contrition, PR guy whose email has been lost to the mists of time, because taken in the context of the TurboGrafx launch, rather than the Wii launch, damn does this version kick ass. R-Type had a kind of rocky localization history in the late 80s. IREM's original arcade game was manufactured and distributed in the US by Nintendo, which I assume was Nintendo's attempt to offer IREM a make-good for bogarting the NES port of Kung Fu as a first-party title. However, despite this, R-Type did not show up on a Nintendo home console until 1991, probably because IREM knew that trying to bring this game to NES or Famicom could only have ended in tears. It did, however, show up on Master System. And as all good Segaiden viewers know, Compile handled the Master System port, which means that the Master System port was the best take on R-Type that the hardware could possibly have managed. Did it look as good as the arcade version? God no. But it played faithfully, and Compile added in some fun new features to add to its appeal, making for one of the standout shooters on Sega's 8-bit console. IRIM's conversion for TurboGrafx 16 takes a more straight-laced approach, aspiring to the platonic ideal of being a faithful arcade port. As such, it makes very few changes from the original arcade release, the biggest difference being the addition of a new boss at the end of the 6th stage's relentless waves of minor enemies. Hope you never wanted to see Stage 7, because the addition of a boss on top of the encounters that stood in for a boss make the finale of Stage 6 really difficult. Otherwise though, this is almost exactly the same game that hit arcades a couple of years earlier. That is not an indictment for a lack of creativity on IRIM's part with this port. It's impressive as hell. R-Type raised the bar for stage design and overall graphical detail in the horizontal shooter format, and the TurboGrafx 16 port manages to bring pretty much all of the arcade version's detail and mechanics home. I'm sure there are some differences in terms of graphics and enemy patterns, but nothing significant enough to stand out. The biggest difference is that the TurboGrafx 16 has a slightly lower screen resolution than the arcade machine did, so there's a small element of vertical scrolling in each stage. But that also means that IRIM didn't compress the visuals or strip out detail, so again, hard to complain. Seriously, this is a tremendous effort, as is Fantasy Zone. It's tough to imagine anyone seeing these adaptations in 1989 and not being utterly impressed. Unfortunately, the TurboGrafx 16's problem was that not very many people saw these adaptations in 1989, so there wasn't anyone to be impressed. There's something to be said for an advertising budget. But if marketing weren't an issue, you can damn well be certain that TurboGrafx 16 would have conquered America.
Next time on TurboWorks, it is almost the 90s, and there is time for Galaga?